He was a millionaire who had everything, except her, until fate gave them a second chance at love. Please leave a like to support our channel. Enjoy the story. The rain tapped relentlessly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Ethan Caldwell's penthouse, a sprawling masterpiece perched atop a skyscraper in downtown Seattle. The city's grey skyline stretched out before him, blurred by the storm, but Ethan barely noticed. At 42, he was a man who had everything: wealth that rivaled the tech moguls of the Pacific Northwest, a name that commanded respect in boardrooms across the country, and a lifestyle most could only dream of. Yet, as he stood there in his tailored suit, a glass of bourbon dangling from his hand, his hazel eyes were hollow, shadowed by a sadness that no amount of money could erase. Ethan Caldwell was a king without a kingdom that mattered. His empire of luxury real estate and investment firms had made him a millionaire by 30 and a billionaire by 40, but the higher he climbed, the emptier he felt. The penthouse, with its sleek marble floors and modern art worth millions, was a silent tomb. No laughter echoed through its halls, no warmth softened its edges. He was alone, profoundly, achingly alone, and the weight of that solitude pressed down on him tonight more than ever. His mind drifted, as it often did, to a girl with chestnut hair and a smile that could light up the darkest corners of his soul. Lily Harper. She'd been his everything once, back when he was just a scrappy college kid with big dreams and a bigger heart. They'd met at a dive bar near the University of Washington, her laughter cutting through the noise like a melody he couldn't forget. She was a scholarship student, fierce and independent, with a spirit that refused to bend. He'd fallen for her hard, too hard maybe, and for a fleeting moment they'd built a world together, one made of whispered promises and stolen kisses under the Puget Sound stars. But that world had crumbled. Ethan's family, old money from the East Coast who'd relocated to Seattle to expand their influence, had despised Lily from the start. To them, she was a nobody, a girl from a trailer park in Tacoma with no pedigree, no place in their polished dynasty. They'd pressured him, manipulated him, convinced him she'd drag him down. And Ethan, young, ambitious and weak, had let them win. He'd walked away from her, leaving behind the only person who'd ever truly seen him. The memory that haunted him most wasn't the breakup itself, though that had been brutal. Lily's tear-streaked face, her voice breaking as she begged him to fight for them. No, it was what came after. She'd called him weeks later, her voice trembling over a crackling phone line telling him she was pregnant. His child, their child. He'd frozen, panic seizing him as his mother's voice echoed in his head. "She's lying, Ethan. She's trapping you." He'd hung up on her, too cowardly to face the truth, and told himself it was a bluff. He never called back, never checked, just buried it deep and let his life roll on. Now, 20 years later, that choice gnawed at him like a wound that wouldn't heal. Did she have the baby? Was there a child out there? His child, growing up without him? Or had she lost it, alone, because he'd abandoned her? The questions circled endlessly, a torment he couldn't escape. He'd tried to find her once, years ago, hiring a private investigator, but the trail had gone cold. Lily Harper had vanished from his life, leaving only ghosts in her wake. Ethan took a slow sip of bourbon, the burn doing little to dull the ache. He was a man who'd built skyscrapers, who'd turned dreams into concrete and steel, but he couldn't rebuild the one thing that mattered. He'd traded love for legacy, and the cost had been his soul. A sharp knock at the door jolted him from his reverie. He frowned, setting the glass down on the polished bar. No one came up here unannounced. Security was too tight. Curious, he crossed the room, his polished shoes clicking against the floor, and opened the door. A courier stood there, rain dripping from his jacket, holding a small weathered envelope. "Ethan Caldwell?" the man asked, voice gruff. "Yeah," Ethan replied, his brow furrowing. "Sign here." The courier thrust a clipboard at him. Ethan scrawled his name, barely glancing at it, and took the envelope. The man disappeared down the hall as quickly as he'd come. Ethan turned the envelope over in his hands. It was plain, no return address, just his name scrawled in a handwriting that sent a shiver down his spine. He knew that slant, that curve of the letters. It couldn't be, but it was. His heart thudded as he tore it open, pulling out a single sheet of paper. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "Ethan, I didn't want to do this, but you need to know. She's yours, and she's asking about you." "Lily." A small photo slipped from the envelope, fluttering to the floor. He bent to pick it up, his breath catching as he saw it. A teenage girl with his hazel eyes staring back at him. His daughter, alive, real. And Lily had kept her all this time. The room spun. Everything he'd buried, everything he'd lost was crashing back into his life. What did this mean? Why now? His hands trembled as he clutched the letter, a storm of hope and dread roaring through him. He had to find them. He had to know. The chandelier lights of the Seattle Art Museum glittered like 1,000 tiny stars, casting a warm glow over the crowd at the annual charity gala. Ethan Caldwell adjusted his black tie, his jaw tight as he navigated the sea of tuxedos and evening gowns. He hated these events, hollow displays of wealth masquerading as generosity, but his company was a major donor and appearances mattered. Tonight, though, his mind wasn't on the small talk or the clinking champagne glasses. It was on the letter, the photo, the daughter he'd never known. 2 days had passed since that envelope had upended his world, and he'd been a wreck ever since, sleep evading him, his heart a tangled mess of guilt and longing. He'd hired his best investigator that morning, a grizzled ex-cop named Malone, to track down Lily Harper. No stone unturned, he'd said. But Ethan wasn't prepared for how fast fate would move. As he stepped toward the bar, a familiar laugh sliced through the hum of the room, a sound he hadn't heard in 20 years but would recognize anywhere. His breath caught, and he turned, scanning the crowd with a desperation that bordered on panic. There she was, Lily, standing near a display of abstract sculptures, her chestnut hair swept into an elegant updo, her emerald dress hugging a figure that time had only made more striking. She was 40 now, a woman carved by life's highs and lows. But to Ethan, she was still the girl who'd stolen his heart under the flickering lights of that Tacoma bar. She was laughing at something a silver-haired man said, her eyes crinkling at the corners, and for a moment Ethan couldn't move. She was here, alive, real. His feet carried him forward before his mind could catch up, the crowd parting like water around him. He stopped a few feet away, his throat dry, his pulse hammering. "Lily," he said, his voice rough, barely above a whisper. She froze mid-laugh, her head snapping toward him. The color drained from her face, those hazel eyes, his eyes, he realized now, widening in shock. The man beside her faltered, glancing between them, but Lily didn't notice. For a long, agonizing moment she just stared, a storm of emotions flickering across her features. Disbelief, pain, anger. Then her lips pressed into a thin line, and she turned away, her shoulders stiffening as if she could will him out of existence. "Lily, wait," Ethan pleaded, stepping closer. His hand reached out instinctively, but he stopped himself, letting it fall. "Please, I need to talk to you." She spun back to face him, her gaze icy. "You don't get to do this, Ethan," she said, her voice low but sharp, cutting through the noise of the gala. "Not after all this time, not after what you did." The words hit him like a slap, but he didn't flinch. He deserved them. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I know I don't deserve it. But the letter... Lily, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Her eyes narrowed, searching his face for a lie, but all she'd find there was raw, unguarded truth. She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that trembled with suppressed fury. "You didn't want to know. You walked away. You left me alone with a baby, while your family called me trash. And now you think a letter changes that." Ethan's chest tightened, guilt clawing at him. "I was wrong," he said, his words spilling out in a rush. "I was a coward. I've regretted it every day since. Please, just tell me about her. Tell me she's okay." Lily's expression softened for a split second, a crack in her armor, before it hardened again. She crossed her arms, her gaze darting away as if she couldn't bear to look at him. "Her name's Grace," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "She's 17, smart, stubborn, beautiful, and she's mine. I raised her alone, Ethan. No help, no handouts. Just me. Grace." His daughter had a name. The weight of it crashed over him, a tidal wave of awe and shame. 17 years. He'd missed every milestone, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. He'd been building an empire while Lily built a life, a family without him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, tears stinging his eyes. "I didn't know how to fix it. I didn't know where you were." "You didn't look hard enough," she shot back, her voice cracking. "You had all the money in the world, Ethan. You could have found us if you'd cared." He opened his mouth to argue, to beg, but the words died as a new figure approached, a teenage girl with his hazel eyes and Lily's sharp cheekbones. She wore a simple black dress, her dark hair falling in waves over her shoulders, and she carried herself with a quiet confidence that made Ethan's heart lurch. Grace. "Mum, they're starting the auction," she said, her voice bright until she noticed Ethan. Her brow furrowed and she glanced at Lily. "Who's this?" Lily's face paled, her hands trembling as she reached for her daughter. "Grace, honey, this is—" She hesitated, her eyes locking with Ethan's, a silent war raging behind them. Then she straightened, her voice steady but laced with something unspoken. "This is Ethan Caldwell, your father." Grace's eyes widened, her mouth parting in shock as she stared at him. Ethan felt the ground tilt beneath him, his world narrowing to this moment. This girl, his daughter, looking at him like he was a stranger. Which he was. Her expression shifted from surprise to something darker, confusion, hurt, maybe even betrayal, and she took a step back, closer to Lily. Grace started, her voice faltering. She looked at her mother, then back at him, her hands curling into fists. "You're the guy who left us?" Ethan's heart shattered. "Grace, he began, but she shook her head, cutting him off. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't want to hear it." She turned to Lily, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Why is he here, Mum? Why now?" Lily pulled her close, her own eyes shining with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "I don't know, baby," she murmured, glaring at Ethan over Grace's shoulder. "But he's not staying." Ethan stood there, helpless, as Lily guided Grace away, the crowd swallowing them up. His chest ached, a hollow pit where hope had briefly flickered. He'd found them, Lily, alive and fierce. Grace, a living piece of him he'd never known. But they didn't want him. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As he watched them disappear, a sharp cry echoed from the far side of the room, a woman's voice, panicked. "Call 911, she's hurt!" Ethan's head snapped toward the sound, his blood running cold as he saw a cluster of people near the exit. And then he saw her. Lily crumpled on the floor, Grace kneeling beside her, sobbing. Time stopped. His past, his future, everything he'd lost and might still lose, was slipping through his fingers again. He ran toward them, fear choking him, knowing this was his fault, somehow, always, his fault. Ethan shoved through the crowd, his heart pounding like a war drum as he fought to reach Lily. The gala's polished veneer had shattered. Guests in their glittering finery now gaped in stunned silence or whispered in hushed panic. He barely registered their faces, his world narrowing to the sight of Lily sprawled on the marble floor, her emerald dress fanned out like spilled ink. Grace knelt beside her, her hands trembling as she clutched her mother's arm, tears streaming down her face. "Mum, please, wake up," she sobbed, her voice raw and breaking. Ethan dropped to his knees beside them, his breath ragged. Lily's eyes were closed, her face pale, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. A shattered champagne flute lay nearby, its jagged edges glinting under the chandelier light. Someone must have bumped into her, sent her crashing into the table. "Lily," he whispered, his voice shaking as he reached for her. His fingers brushed her cheek, cold and still, and a wave of terror crashed over him. Not now. Not like this. He couldn't lose her again. Not when he'd just found her. "Somebody get help," he roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. A few guests scrambled, phones pressed to their ears while others hovered uselessly. Grace looked up at him, her hazel eyes, his eyes, wide with fear and accusation. "Do something," she cried. "You're supposed to be her—" She couldn't finish, choking on the word father, but the weight of it hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. "I'm here," Ethan said, his voice cracking as he pressed his hand to Lily's wrist, searching for a pulse. It was there, faint, erratic, but there, and relief flooded him, though it was fleeting. He leaned closer, his lips near her ear. "Hold on, Lily. Please, I'm not leaving you this time." It was a promise, a prayer, a plea to a universe that had already taken too much from him. Paramedics burst through the doors minutes later, their red and white uniforms a stark contrast to the gala's elegance. Ethan stepped back, his hands slick with sweat, as they swarmed around Lily. Grace clung to his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, and he realized she hadn't let go of him, not completely. "She's going to be okay, right?" she whispered, her voice small, a child's voice beneath the bravado she'd shown earlier. "She has to be," Ethan said, more to himself than to her. He pulled her closer, awkward but desperate, and for a moment she didn't pull away. The medics lifted Lily onto a stretcher, her head lolling slightly and Ethan's stomach twisted. He followed them out, Grace at his side, the cold Seattle night biting at his skin as they climbed into the ambulance. The ride to Harborview Medical Center was a blur of sirens and sterile light. Ethan sat across from Grace, who stared at her mother's still form, her hands knotted in her lap. He wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the chasm between them, but the words felt inadequate, swallowed by the hum of the engine and the beeping monitors. She was his daughter, yet she was a stranger, and the guilt of that gnawed at him like a living thing. At the hospital, they were ushered into a waiting room, its beige walls and flickering fluorescent lights a stark contrast to the gala's opulence. Grace paced, her sneakers squeaking against the linoleum, while Ethan stood by the window, staring out at the rain-slicked city. Hours crawled by, each tick of the clock a dagger in his chest. He replayed every moment with Lily, their first kiss by the sound, the way she'd laughed at his terrible jokes, the night she'd told him about the baby. He'd thrown it all away, and now fate was dangling her life in front of him, a cruel test he wasn't sure he could pass. A doctor finally emerged, her face weary but calm. "She's stable," she said, and Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. She hit her head hard, concussion, some bruising, but no internal bleeding. She's awake now, asking for her daughter. Grace bolted upright, relief washing over her features. "Can I see her?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. "Of course," the doctor said, then glanced at Ethan. "You too, if she's okay with it." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. They followed the doctor down a sterile hallway, the antiseptic smell stinging his nose, until they reached Lily's room. She lay propped up in bed, a bandage on her forehead, her eyes half open but sharp. When she saw Grace, a tired smile curved her lips. "Hey, baby," she murmured, reaching out. Grace rushed to her, burying her face in her mother's shoulder, and Ethan stood back, an outsider to their bond. Then Lily's gaze shifted to him, and the air grew heavy. "You're still here," she said, her voice flat, unreadable. "I told you I wouldn't leave," he replied, stepping closer, his hands shoved into his pockets to hide their trembling. "Not this time." She studied him, her expression a mix of exhaustion and something softer, something he couldn't name. "Grace," she said, her eyes never leaving his, "can you give us a minute?" Grace hesitated, glancing between them, then nodded and slipped out, leaving the door ajar. Silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until Lily spoke again. "She's been asking about you lately. Who you are, why you weren't there. I didn't know what to tell her, until that letter." Ethan's heart stuttered. "I want to know her, Lily. I want to make it right. With her. With you." Lily's laugh was bitter, brittle. You don't get to just waltz back in, Ethan. She's not a prize you can claim, and me, I've built a life without you. I had to." Her voice cracked, betraying the pain she'd buried deep. "But she deserves to know you, even if I hate it. So I'll try, for her." He nodded, tears burning his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I'm asking." She looked away, her jaw tight, and he saw the war in her, the love she'd once felt battling the scars he'd left behind. He wanted to reach for her, to pull her into his arms and erase the years, but she was a fortress now, walls he'd helped build. Still, there was a flicker there, a spark of the girl he'd loved, and it lit something in him, hope, fragile but fierce. Grace returned, her presence easing the tension, and for the next hour they sat together, an uneasy trio bound by blood and broken promises. Ethan watched his daughter, memorizing the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way her voice softened when she spoke to Lily. She was a miracle he didn't deserve, and yet here she was, inching closer to him with every hesitant word. When she asked about his life, his work, his world, he answered with a gentleness he hadn't known he possessed, and her guarded smiles pierced his heart. But as the night deepened, a shadow loomed. A nurse burst in, her face pale. "Ms. Harper, we need to run more tests. Your vitals just spiked. There might be something we missed." Lily's hand tightened around Grace's, her eyes darting to Ethan, wide with fear. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan's stomach dropped, dread clawing at him as the room erupted into motion, doctors, machines, urgent voices. Grace clung to him, her bravado gone, and he held her tight, his gaze locked on Lily as they wheeled her away. She was slipping from him again, and this time he wasn't sure he could follow. The hospital room emptied as quickly as it had filled, leaving Ethan and Grace alone in a silence that buzzed with fear. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows on Grace's tear-streaked face as she clung to Ethan's arm, her breaths shallow and ragged. He could feel her trembling, her small frame pressed against him, and it struck him how fragile she was beneath the defiance she'd worn like armor. She was his daughter, his, and yet he didn't know how to comfort her, didn't know the words to ease the terror in her eyes. All he could do was hold her, his own heart hammering as the image of Lily being wheeled away burned into his mind. "What's wrong with her?" Grace whispered, her voice breaking. "She was fine. She was talking to us." "She can't—" She stopped, choking on a sob, and Ethan pulled her closer, his chin resting on her head. "She's strong," he said, forcing certainty into his voice, even as doubt gnawed at him. "She's a fighter, Grace. She's been fighting for you her whole life. She won't give up now." He didn't know if he was reassuring her or himself, but the words felt like a lifeline, something to cling to as the minutes stretched into an eternity. They sat on the stiff hospital chairs, the cold plastic biting into their skin, and waited. Ethan's mind raced, replaying every second since the gala, the way Lily's eyes had softened when she looked at Grace, the flicker of vulnerability when she'd spoken to him. He'd seen it, hadn't he? A crack in the wall she'd built, a hint that maybe, just maybe, she didn't hate him as much as she claimed. And now she was slipping away again, her life hanging on a thread he couldn't grasp. A doctor emerged at last, his face lined with exhaustion. "She's stable again," he said, and Grace sagged against Ethan, a shaky breath escaping her. "It was a delayed reaction, internal swelling from the fall. We've got it under control, but she needs rest. You can see her soon." Ethan nodded, relief warring with the ache in his chest. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. Grace wiped her eyes, pulling away slightly, and he felt the loss of her warmth like a physical blow. She was still a stranger to him, but every moment with her stitched something broken back together inside him. When they were allowed back in, Lily looked smaller somehow, swallowed by the hospital bed and the tangle of wires. Her eyes fluttered open as they approached, and a faint smile curved her lips. "You two look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice weak, but laced with that familiar fire. Grace laughed, a watery sound, and climbed onto the bed, curling up beside her mother. "Don't scare me like that again," she said, burying her face in Lily's shoulder. "I can't lose you." "You won't," Lily promised, her hand stroking Grace's hair. Her gaze shifted to Ethan, lingering there, and he felt exposed, raw, under her scrutiny. "You're still here," she said again, but this time it wasn't an accusation, just a quiet observation. "I told you," he replied, stepping closer, his hands shoved into his pockets to keep from reaching for her. "I'm not going anywhere." She held his gaze, and for a moment, the years melted away. He saw the girl he'd loved, the one who'd danced with him in the rain, who'd whispered dreams of a future they'd never had. But then her eyes hardened, and she looked away, the moment slipping through his fingers like sand. Days passed in that hospital room, a fragile truce settling between them. Ethan stayed, bringing coffee and takeout from Lily's favorite Seattle spots, Places he remembered from their college days, like the greasy diner on Pike Street, where she'd always ordered extra fries. Grace warmed to him slowly, her questions shifting from wary to curious. "Did you really build that tower downtown?" she asked one afternoon, her eyes wide as she nibbled on a burger. "Yeah," he said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Took 3 years. Nearly drove me crazy." She grinned, a flash of Lily in her expression, and his heart swelled. He was earning her trust piece by piece, and it felt like a miracle. With Lily, though, it was different, tender moments punctuated by sharp edges. She'd let him sit by her side, let him help her adjust the pillows, but her walls stayed up, her words careful. Still, there were cracks, times when she'd laugh at his dumb jokes or when her hand brushed his and lingered just a second too long. One night, as Grace slept in the chair beside the bed, Lily turned to him, her voice soft in the dim light. "I used to dream about you coming back," she admitted, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. "After you left, I'd lie awake imagining you'd show up at my door, begging to see us. But you never did." Ethan's throat tightened, shame flooding him. "I wanted to," he said, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "I was scared, Lily. My family, they had me convinced I'd ruin everything if I stayed with you. I was wrong. I've been wrong about so much." She turned her head, meeting his gaze, and tears glistened in her eyes. "I loved you, Ethan, more than anything, and you broke me." Her voice cracked and she swiped at her cheek, angry at her own vulnerability. "I don't know if I can let you back in. Not like that." "I don't expect you to," he said, his voice low, fervent. "But I'll spend the rest of my life proving I'm not that guy anymore. For you, for Grace." She didn't respond, but her silence wasn't cold. It was heavy, thoughtful. The next day she was stronger, sitting up, teasing Grace about her terrible taste in music. Ethan watched them, a quiet ache blooming in his chest. This was what he'd missed. A family, messy and real. He'd trade every dollar, every skyscraper for this. When Lily was discharged, Ethan drove them to her modest house in West Seattle, a craftsman bungalow with peeling paint and a garden bursting with wildflowers. He carried her bags inside, ignoring her protests, and lingered in the doorway as Grace helped her settle on the couch. "You don't have to stay," Lily said, but her tone lacked its usual bite. "I want to," he replied, meeting her eyes. "If you'll let me." She hesitated, then nodded, a small concession that felt like a victory. Over the next week he became a fixture, cooking dinners that Grace devoured, fixing the leaky faucet Lily had ignored for months. He didn't push, didn't ask for more than she was willing to give, but every shared glance, every accidental touch, stoked a fire he thought had died long ago. One evening, as rain pattered against the windows, Lily found him on the porch, staring out at the sound. "You're different," she said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "Not the Ethan I knew." "I've had 20 years to figure out who I should have been," he said, turning to her. "I love you, Lily, I never stopped. And I'll wait as long as it takes for you to believe that." Her breath hitched, and she stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest. For a heartbeat he thought she might kiss him, her lips parted, her eyes searching his, but then she pulled back, fear flickering across her face. "I need time," she whispered. "Take it," he said, his voice steady despite the ache. "I'm not going anywhere." The next morning Grace burst into the kitchen, her face alight with excitement. "Mom, look what came!" She held up an envelope, and Lily's smile faded as she opened it. Ethan watched, unease prickling his skin, as her hands trembled, a photograph slipping to the floor, a grainy image of a car crash, wreckage twisted and raw. "What is it?" he asked, stepping closer. Lily's voice was a whisper, laced with dread. "It's a warning. Someone doesn't want us together." The photograph lay on the kitchen table like a dark omen, its edges curling slightly from the damp Seattle air seeping through the bungalow's old windows. Ethan's stomach churned as he stared at the wreckage, a mangled car, its driver's side crumpled beyond recognition, captured in stark black and white. Lily's hands shook as she clutched the envelope, her face drained of color, while Grace hovered beside her, confusion etching lines into her young features. The note inside was simple, scrawled in jagged ink. "Stay away from him, or this is you." No signature, no explanation, just a threat that hung in the room like a storm cloud ready to break. "Who sent this?" Ethan demanded, his voice rough with a mix of fear and fury. He reached for the photo, but Lily snatched it back, her eyes blazing as they met his. "I don't know," she snapped, though her voice trembled. "But it's because of you, isn't it? You come back into our lives and now this." She thrust the note at him, her breath hitching. "Someone wants me gone, Ethan. And Grace. God, what if they go after her too?" Grace's eyes widened, and she stepped closer to her mother, her bravado crumbling. "Mom, what's happening? Why would anyone—" Her voice broke, and she looked at Ethan, searching for answers he didn't have. "I'll fix this," he said, his jaw tight as he took the note from Lily's trembling fingers. "I swear I won't let anything happen to either of you." But even as he spoke, doubt clawed at him. Who would do this? His mind raced to his family. His mother, Eleanor, with her icy disdain for Lily, or his brother, James, who'd always resented Ethan's success. They'd never forgiven him for loving her, for daring to defy their pristine world. Could they stoop this low? Lily sank onto a chair, her head in her hands, and Ethan knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder before settling there, tentative but firm. "I'm calling Malone," he said. "My investigator. He'll find out who's behind this. You're not in this alone anymore." She looked up at him, tears streaking her face, and for the first time she didn't pull away. "I'm scared, Ethan," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it. "I've fought for everything, Grace, this house, my life. I can't lose it all now." "You won't," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "I've lost you once. I'm not letting it happen again." The next few days were a blur of tension and quiet moments that stitched them closer. Malone dug into the threat, tracing the envelope to a burner phone purchased in Bellevue, a lead that pointed nowhere yet. Ethan stayed at the bungalow, sleeping on the lumpy couch, his presence a shield against the unknown. Grace took to him more each day, her laughter filling the house as he taught her to play poker with spare change, her sharp wit a mirror of Lily's. And Lily. She softened, her guarded glances turning to lingering looks, her hand brushing his as they washed dishes side by side. One night, as Grace slept upstairs, Lily joined Ethan on the porch, the rain a steady drumbeat against the roof. She held 2 mugs of tea, handing him one, and sat beside him on the weathered swing. "I keep thinking about that crash," she said, her voice low. "It's not just a threat, it's personal. Someone knows us, knows what we were." Ethan sipped the tea, the warmth doing little to ease the chill in his bones. "I've been running from my family for years," he admitted. "They hated you because you were everything they couldn't control. If it's them, I'll end it. I'll cut them out for good." She turned to him, her eyes searching his face. "You'd do that? Walk away from all that money, that power? For you and Grace?" He set the mug down, his hand finding hers, lacing their fingers together. "In a heartbeat. I've built towers, Lily, but you're the only thing that ever felt like home." Her breath caught and she leaned into him, her forehead resting against his. "I want to believe you," she murmured. "I want to trust this, us. But I'm terrified." "Then let me prove it," he said, tilting her chin up, his lips brushing hers in a kiss that was soft, tentative, then deepening as she kissed him back. It was a reclaiming, a promise, 20 years of longing poured into a single moment. When they pulled apart, her eyes shone with tears, but she smiled, a real unguarded smile that lit up the night. The next morning, Malone called. "It's your brother," he said, his voice grim over the speakerphone. "James. He's been tailing Lily for weeks, hired some lowlife to scare her off. I've got proof, photos, payments. He's unhinged, Ethan. Thinks you're throwing away the family legacy." Ethan's blood ran cold, but rage quickly followed. "Where is he?" he demanded. "His condo in Belltown," Malone said. "I'd move fast." Ethan hung up, turning to Lily, who'd gone pale. "Stay here with Grace," he said, grabbing his keys. "I'm ending this." She grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. "Be careful. I need you back." He kissed her hard, a vow in the press of his lips, then drove into the city, the rain blurring the windshield as he sped toward Belltown. James's condo loomed ahead, a sleek tower of glass and steel, and Ethan stormed inside, his fury a living thing. He found his brother in the penthouse, sprawled on a leather couch, a glass of scotch in hand. "You're pathetic," Ethan spat, slamming the door behind him, threatening Lily. "Grace, what the hell is wrong with you?" James smirked, unfazed. "Hey, you're the one throwing it all away for some trailer trash and her brat. Mom's rolling in her grave." Ethan lunged, pinning James against the wall, his forearm against his throat. "You don't get to touch them," he growled. "Not ever. You're done." James wheezed, his smirk fading as Ethan released him, stepping back. "I've got evidence," Ethan said. "You're going down for this, or you leave Seattle and never come back. Choose." James glared, but the fight drained from him. "Fine," he muttered. "You'll regret this." "I already regret you," Ethan said, walking out, the door slamming shut on his past. Back at the bungalow, Lily and Grace waited, relief flooding their faces as he stepped inside. "It's over," he said, pulling them both into his arms. "He's gone." Weeks later, the air was crisp with autumn as Ethan stood in the backyard, a small velvet box in his pocket. Lily emerged from the house, her hair loose, her smile tentative but warm. Grace watched from the porch, a knowing grin on her face. "Lily Harper," Ethan said, dropping to one knee, the ring glinting in the sunlight. "I've loved you since I was 19. I lost you once, but I'm never letting go again. Marry me. Let me be yours, ours, forever." Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, pulling him up into a kiss that tasted of salt and second chances. Grace cheered, rushing to join them, and they stood there, a family forged from pain and redemption. The wedding was small, held in the garden under a canopy of golden leaves, with Grace as their witness. Ethan severed ties with his family's fortune, pouring his wealth into a foundation for single mothers, a tribute to Lily's strength. They built a life in that bungalow, not of skyscrapers, but of love, laughter, and late-night talks. As they danced at their reception, Lily whispered against his ear, "You were worth the wait." And Ethan knew with every beat of his heart that this, them, was the treasure he'd been chasing all along. What did you think of the story? Leave your rating from 0 to 10 in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to get our stories firsthand, and also check out this touching story that's showing on your screen right now.